Our next guest, well, this is one of our favorite guests. He was on a couple of months ago talking about just how dangerous doing a deal with Iran is. He's back again. He works alongside guys like Mark Dubowitz and Ben Wienthal at the Federation for Defense of Democracies. One of our favorites, John Schanzer. Jonathan, good morning, pal. How are you?
Good morning. How you doing?
Sad, actually. I'm a big Giant fan. I didn't care much about the Giant-Patriot game yesterday. I just found myself immersed in this all weekend, and when people say things to me like, hey, listen, it's not our war, like Hillary Clinton said, it's sad, but it's their war, not ours, it makes me sad and angry.
Well, you're one of the people who care about this thing right now, and we should all be concerned because Paris is probably just one stop along the way for ISIS.
Yeah, I kept hearing all weekend long about a 4-phase plan for ISIS, John, and they're into phase 3, which is places like France and what we saw in Beirut on Friday and the airplane over Egypt and maybe Iran. And phase 4 is the ultimate conquest, which is the United States. So if you believe that's true, then they are 75% of the way towards destroying us.
Well, look, we don't know what their exact plans are, but what we can say is this, is that ISIS started off as a territorial organization, right? I mean, that they were really just only focused on expanding in Syria and then into Iraq, and that it looked like they were really just content on maintaining that territory and conquering a little bit more here and there. Now it looks like they've morphed into a hybrid terrorist organization, that what they are doing now is branching out into international terrorism. So we have seen the downing of that Russian airliner, the suicide attack in Russia, and now, of course, the attack in Paris. And so the question is whether this is now the new trend. And if so, what it really, I think, underscores is that our strategy of containing ISIS and ultimately defeating it, as the president has called it, I think has been deeply flawed. I think we've learned over history that when you see a threat like this, you don't give it oxygen. And so we're looking now at blowback from allowing this organization to live.
Yeah, I'm watching Lindsey Graham and John McCain on CNN right now. Lindsey's saying 20 bombs is not adequate response. Lindsey was actually on this show Friday. He's been on 3 times over the last 6 weeks. I believe he's the only guy of all the candidates on the left and on the right. He's the only guy that really has any idea what to do. He has said from day one, John Schanzer, you have to beat these folks by putting boots on the ground. You can drop bombs all over Raqqa, all over Iraq, everywhere, but you got to get these people out of their houses, whether it's Brussels or Saudi Arabia or Libya, and shoot them. Bottom line is, they're not stupid. They're not going to sit around and wait for you to bomb them, and they're all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, look, the way that I would describe what we've done up until now is a tactical bombing campaign. So we look for targets of opportunity, we bomb them from the air, and really it's weed whacking, it's mowing the lawn, and it's just simply insufficient. Now, this is not to say that we need to put 100,000 troops on the ground and have a full-on operation.
How about let's start with 15,000? How about starting somewhere?
Look, you can start with special forces on the ground, but more than 50. Okay, which is what we have right now, and this was apparently a big deal to the White House. What you need is people who are on the ground to identify targets so that they can be taken out. But I'll tell you this, that our intermittent bombing campaign, the one that we've been conducting for the last year or more, is really, I mean, I think it's been shown just over the last 2 days to be completely ineffective, because what we're looking at now is a France that has carried out more attacks than we have over the last several weeks. How is it that they were suddenly able to generate good intelligence, good targets, and then bomb 20 of them in one day as we sit there and pick and choose and brag about how we have ISIS contained? It's really remarkable.
I'm so glad you said that, John, because here we are, Barack Obama, the nice guy. Hey, we helped France out. We gave them the intelligence. See, it made me angry because what it said to me was, we knew about this. I've known about Raqqa for 2 years. So why is it that it took this attack in France for us to give them the intel about Raqqa? Why weren't we bombing Raqqa a long time ago?
This is exactly what people should be asking our White House right now. It is unacceptable. If we were sitting on those targets and we had them for a while, why was it that we were not bombing them right away? Why is it that we had to wait until a mass casualty attack in order to hand over this intel to our allies? These are questions that I'm asking right now. But again, it appears that you don't generate this kind of intelligence overnight. It usually takes weeks to identify these targets, to be able to verify them. So how is it that we were just able to simply hand them over to France and to let them start bombing like this? Something does not add up. My suspicion all along is that we have not been taking this fight seriously enough, and I think that suspicion has been confirmed.
I've got liberals on my Facebook page that are angry with me because I placed some of the blame, what happened in Paris, on Obama. And they're like, oh, hold on a second. It's not our country. Last I checked, we haven't had a major attack here. I remind people, too, there were no major attacks the last 7 years of President Bush's presidency as well. But they don't want to hear that. And the reason why I partly blame Obama for this are two reasons. First of all, he did refer to ISIS as the JV not that long ago, and because he's done nothing, he's part of the problem. That's why they've matured into the varsity. And second of all, it was just that morning, Friday morning, where he had the moronic assertion that ISIS is being contained. How could I not place some of the blame on our own president?
Look, the way that this president has gone about this is that he has been noncommittal about a war that he's already declared. And you don't fight wars to just contain an enemy. You fight wars to defeat them. And I think that's probably what's kind of scratching at the back of your mind. I think it's what's been bothering a lot of Americans, that when we decided to go into Afghanistan, for example, and beat the Taliban or to destroy al-Qaeda, we did not rest until it was done. And we're not looking at a situation like that right now, where it looks like our efforts to keep together an international coalition and to work with allies that are really not even really allies. I'd call them frenemies at best. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others that have contributed to this problem. We're so concerned about what they think and what the perception of our war is that I think we have been fighting with one hand tied behind our back. And that's just not how you win wars. It's how you get blowback along the lines of what we've seen now over this weekend.
I found your last column really interesting, intriguing, and scary. Jonathan Schanzer, the foundation, I should say, for defense of democracies. It is titled Terror on the Cheap, Paris Attacks Required Little Funding. And you go on to talk about, John, a few attacks, the 2008 Mumbai attacks, the 2013 Westgate Mall attack, that was horrifying, the 2015 attack on the Western tourists in Tunisia, and this in Paris as well. I mean, if you really think back about this, they'll end up killing maybe 200 people with a couple of AK-47s and a couple of explosive belts and some grenades. I mean, honestly, anybody on the street can fund something like that. That's the scary part.
That's right. I mean, you think about each suicide belt that these guys had maybe cost $5,000 or $10,000. The Kalashnikovs that they had probably cost $1,500 or $2,000 on the streets, and then you've got your ammunition, maybe a few $100s more. And so you add it all up, and really what they just needed was shelter, maybe communication, food, and nobody knows exactly how long they were holed up for, but we think probably since February. So less than a year of needing that kind of shelter, and then again just very basic gear. And so you're talking about an attack that was done on the cheap, one that is extremely difficult to track. I'm a former terror finance analyst, and I think it's probably likely that they were working outside of the electronic banking system, which means that we were probably unable to track their funds in the first place. And so this is extremely difficult to stop. And, I think it's an indication of the kind of attacks that we're going to be seeing more of. You mentioned some of the attacks that have happened like this over the last 7-8 years. And it does seem to be that this is a new trend.
Yeah, you think about it, they probably put 3 or 4 of those guys in the same apartment anyway, right? I mean, 3 of them in the same apartment, 1 box of food or something. So, I mean, if you had to add it all up, you talked about what it may cost for an explosive belt and for some of the guns. What do you think, if you had to add it all up for the last 6 months, including housing, what does it cost for one of these terrorists?
I think low-end estimate is $250,000. I think, maybe if you had secure communication and safe houses and a bunch of other, let's just say, more advanced logistical needs, maybe it's $500,000. But I think, from all indications, that the real cost that went into this was the training of these individuals, whether it was in Syria or someplace else, and the indoctrination, which probably started to happen when these people were in their teens. And so you're really talking about something that is just so easy to fund, and that's what makes this so scary.
What makes it scary for me, too, is, look, in this attack, we think we know that the mastermind is in Brussels. We had a chance to nab that 8th terror suspect this morning. I believe we did not do it. But for me, I always think about, we know that when we hatch an idea in the United States, other than a golf course, it's somewhere in Washington, D.C., right, or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv in Israel. I have no idea where these guys are. I couldn't tell you if the guy behind this is wearing a real nice suit and driving a Mercedes in Saudi Arabia today, or if he's living somewhere in Libya today. I find it hard to believe, my point, that he's sitting around in Raqqa right now. He's that guy. So how do we even find out, seriously, where these things are even hatched?
Right, and that's what U.S. investigators, French investigators, and others right now are going to be looking into. And what's scary actually is the appeal of the ISIS ideology. That that ISIS appears to be gaining adherents, not just in places like Iraq and Syria, where you're seeing people who are really forced to join the movement under duress and out of fear, but that you're seeing people streaming from all over the world into Iraq and Syria, or supporting it from the outside. You see these people on Twitter supporting this and Facebook. And so it's the ideology that is so disconcerting. And again, it gives you that sense that attacks like this could be hatched from the West out of the comforts of our own culture.
I would ask you this then, the refugee crisis migrating not just into Europe, but reports that thousands will be allowed into Louisiana in this country too. Where do we go with that, John?
Look, this is one of those tough questions that I'm not sure how to answer. You've got millions of people who do need to be resettled and their lives need to be put back on track as a result of this conflict. And so you see the Europeans right now reaching out and trying to do the right thing. But, of course, you can't do this right without making sure that they are integrated into society, that they're vetted properly so that you're not letting the wrong people into your country. And so a lot of people are pointing to this attack and saying this is what happens when you let, refugees into your country. That may be part of it, but I don't think that that's necessarily at the root of the problem. The root of the problem here is ending this war in Syria and Iraq. It's about defeating Assad. It's about defeating ISIS. It's about setting things right in that country so that people don't need to leave. That is ultimately, I think, what we keep forgetting here. We've taken our eye off the ball, that this is a war. Again, we've been fighting it with one hand behind our back. We need to end this thing. The longer it goes on, the longer the crisis continues, the more opportunity we're going to have for attacks along the lines of what happened in Paris on Friday.
John Schanzer from the FDD. Hey, John, let's go back to the earlier part of this discussion, which we talked about how inexpensive it was to fund these attacks, not just in Paris on Friday, but 4 or 5 major attacks over the last couple of years. When you start to figure out where the money is coming from, where is the money coming from? You talk in the column about the Gulf, you talk about oil, but you also say that racketeering and taxes is where they're really getting the big money from. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, I mean, look, what we've seen actually is a lot of money that is going over the border from Turkey, of course, a NATO ally, which should be maddening to anyone in this country that has been tracking that relationship. But the Turks, I think, have been playing a very dangerous game, trying to bring down the Assad regime, and in the process, they've allowed these deep pocket donors in the Gulf to send money in bulk over the border. There's the oil sales, which we know ISIS has been selling into Turkish territory. Lately, we've seen antiquities. You see that ISIS takes a sledgehammer to a lot of the antiquities in places like Syria and Iraq, and you think that they're just destroying all of it, but in fact, they're selling it, and it's big business. But the real thing, if you really want to stop, I think all of those things together probably account for maybe 50% of ISIS finance. But, another 50% alone comes from the fact that ISIS controls territory and they extort from their own people, they tax their own people, and they're just, they're locusts. Everywhere they go, every piece of territory they take, they sap the resources and they eat it up. And so it reinforces this idea here that we need to stop ISIS from growing, and we need to start to take land away from it. So it does dovetail with the military strategy. When we don't do enough to contain and defeat ISIS, containing actually is even the wrong word.
Right.
We just need to stop it in its tracks and then beat it back. And the longer we don't do that, the more ISIS is able to get the resources for attacks along the lines of what we saw on Friday.
That was some excellent, excellent work once again from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Read his latest column, Terror on the Cheap, just how inexpensive it was to fund these Paris attacks and many other major attacks over the last couple of years. You'd be surprised to find out how inexpensive it is, and of course that makes it even scarier. I do want to thank Jonathan Schanzer for a great, great job. Thank Jonathan Schanzer for a great, great job. Thank Jonathan Schanzer.